Hi, welcome to the Budding Business Podcast. My name is Ryan Greer, co-chair of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce's National Cannabis Working Group. With me is Nathan Mison, my fellow co-chair of the working group. Hey, Nathan, how you doing today?
Very well, thank you very much. Lots going on, and it's exciting time and interesting to have the conversations with two great people today.
Excellent. Well, if you're one of the tens of people that listen to our first podcast, you might already know, but this is a podcast about the business of bud. Specifically, we're looking at Canada's regulated industry, which is changing seemingly minute by minute. Canada is first out of the gate on recreational cannabis for adult use. Nathan and I have been working with a number of Canadian companies, producers, processors, retailers, ancillary service providers, advocating to governments for policies that will, of course, make the sector more competitive, but also helping governments fulfill their health and safety objectives. So, we've decided through this podcast to start sharing some of the conversations that we've been having with industry over the last 18 months with a bigger audience. Anything else you wanna add before we get into this next one, Nathan?
Yeah, I think this conversation is really exciting because we talk about, not just Canada, but how Canada can continue to lead in the world. And I think that conversation is really important at a time where we're looking to rebuild our economy coming out of a global pandemic. And I think these two people bring a really interesting perspective. And we're excited to have Deepak and Mimi on the show.
Yeah, so you said it. We have Deepak Anand. He's the co-founder and CEO of Materia Ventures. He's one of the most connected people in all of Canadian cannabis. And we also welcomed Mimi Lam.
Yeah, Mimi is the CEO and co-founder of Superette. She's a driven entrepreneur focused on cannabis retail and brand experience. And Superette has had a really exciting time building in on Ottawa and is continuing to expand in Ontario, and has a really different brand feel to a lot of other retailers. And we can't wait to hear why she's done that and what the philosophy of Superette is.
Yeah, well, let's get to it. Before we do, just to let you know that today's podcast is sponsored by Diplomat Consulting. It's presented by the Canadian Chamber. So far we're 2 for 2, getting some pretty incredible guests for this podcast. So no pressure on us, but let's go on to our conversation with Mimi and Deepak.
In the second episode, we are excited to have Deepak Anand and Mimi Lam joining us to chat about the Canadian cannabis industry and how it's fared during the pandemic. Deepak is a recognized thought leader in the global cannabis space and an expert in cannabis regulations, having been at the forefront of medical cannabis legislation for several years. His previous experience includes Vice President of Business Development and Government Relations at Cannabis Compliance, Inc., and Vice President of Zenabis. Most recently, he is CEO and co-founder of Materia, a medical cannabis company focused on manufacturing, distribution, and consumer acquisition in the global medical market. Thank you very much for joining us, Deepak. We're excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, Nathan.
A driven entrepreneur focused on cannabis, retail, and brand experience, Mimi Lam is the co-founder and CEO of Superette. As a leader specializing in executing business strategy, scaling operations, and capital market planning, Mimi has been recognized for her excellence with a range of awards, including Best New Business 2019 from the Ottawa Business Journal and the Board of Trade, and Women in Weed as a trailblazer, top bud tender, top startup, and top retailer, all at the CCAs. Welcome, guys. Thank you very much for attending. And Mimi, we're really excited to have you.
Excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Ryan.
I was just say, how's everybody managing? How's your pandemic experience going now that we're some 7-8 months into it?
I'll go. So, I mean, for me, Ryan, huge change given where I was at. I mean, I was used to traveling, probably 240 days in 2019, and so a big change for me personally from a travel perspective. The pandemic has certainly taught us all that we need to find different ways to kind of look at growing our businesses and continue to operate. And so I think we've gotten around that, and generally, Materia, we've made a lot of progress, in the last 6-8 months that we're quite proud of.
How are you managing, Mimi?
Yeah, a great question. I feel like 2020 has been quite the year. I actually do believe that the cannabis industry is uniquely positioned to thrive in change and thrive in times of change and challenge. We've had to deal with that since before legalization and even before then up until this point. And so over the last several months, we've really had to focus on what is important to our business, what's important to the growth of our business, and how do we move ahead after this pandemic has normalized to what will be the new normal. Similar to Deepak, a lot less travel, a lot less going out and in-person meetings. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And we've had the opportunities to really continue to grow and learn new ways to connect with each other.
What do you guys think is the biggest learning and the biggest obstacle that you've had during COVID? Mimi, your thoughts?
Yeah, lots of learnings. A lot of it has to do with communication. I think a lot of my time right now is managing internal and external relationships. And so focus on communications to make sure that we continue to achieve our strategic objectives is something that has been both a challenge and something that we've had to be quite fluid with over the last several months.
Deepak, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo the communication kind of as being, an opportunity, certainly that we've gotten around. I feel like, we've all found different ways to be able to communicate and network. I think one of the biggest things, biggest changes that I personally see in the cannabis industry was we had a lot of conferences, we had a lot of events that people were going to network, and now not having taken that away from us, I think we found additional forms of communication and kind of navigating that. From a challenge perspective, I would say capital raising in a COVID situation is not ideal, and I would say far from. Particularly, the cannabis industry is already, definitely impacted from a capital raise perspective, and so I would say, just compounding COVID with that is certainly led to a number of challenges on the capital raise side.
I think that's a really interesting point, because that's something that we've seen quite a bit in the environment, and it's interesting that both you guys have gone through raise and growth even before and during COVID. Because so much of the industry was face-to-face, how have you found that environment, and what innovative solutions or conversations are you guys trying to bring to the capital raise in the market, and what more can be done from capital markets and the government to maybe support this fledgling industry?
Yeah, from a capital market standpoint, I think a lot of the challenge was not isolated to the cannabis industry. I think in general, there was a lot of fearfulness and a lot of uncertainty with regards to where this world is even going. What are those macro trends, and what are we going to wake up to tomorrow? And that uncertainty was underpinning a lot of these conversations. And then specifically in cannabis, I think the challenge here was also coming out of a roaring 2018, 2019 from a Canadian capital market standpoint. There was a lot of exuberance over the last several years, and compounding, bringing that back down to reality, layered with the macro uncertainty of COVID, has proven that challenging, for a lot of companies trying to raise out there. I think that what's one thing to note about this industry is that it has proven to be extremely resilient, even during a global health pandemic. We've shown that this is an industry that continues to grow and continues to be strong, both from an economic drivers and labor force and economic standpoint, but also from a consumer standpoint. People are still going to continue consuming these products, and that itself is really important for government and other stakeholders to really understand and recognize.
And then just jumping off of what Mimi kind of mentioned with respect to capital raise and COVID and cannabis, really we haven't seen much by the way of federal government or even provincial governments, as far as accommodating to the cannabis industry, particularly on the capital raise side. I mean, we've had some very talented people in this industry that have left high-paying jobs, whether it be in pharma, whether it be on the quality assurance regulatory side, whether it be on the cultivation side, whether it be from the legacy market, that have given up a lot of their high-paying jobs and the high-paying professions to get into this industry and really build up the legal cannabis industry. And I'd say one of the biggest benefactors of that has really been the federal government with respect to achieving a couple of its policy objectives going into legalization, such as taking this out of the hands of kids. There's an article just yesterday at CBC talking about 2 years in and how consumption for kids has gone down. So what I want to bring this back to is really there hasn't really been a lot of support from both federal and provincial governments, and I'm sure Mimi will talk about some of the provincial government kind of challenges and opportunities both on the COVID side, but from a capital raise perspective, particularly from a CERB perspective or any other incentives, whether it be small business loans and all the other things that many other industries have been privy to, we haven't really seen it get embraced at different government levels, unfortunately.
Yeah, and this is something I feel like, Nathan, you and I have chatted about a lot in terms of, just treat cannabis like any other industry. It is a federally legal industry. We're not asking for special treatment. We're just asking for equitable treatment. So from that standpoint, and kind of seeing the stigma that is still being shown towards the cannabis industry from the government levels, especially during a time like COVID, has been very challenging, to watch.
Let's I'm glad you guys both brought that up. Let's explore that a little bit on sort of governments, and we can say the federal government, but really all levels, and sort of how they view the industry. I mean, there's lots of explanations as for why they do. There's certainly still some stigma attached to the industry, and other reasons why governments perhaps view embracing the industry as a bit of a liability politically, even if that's misguided, given some of the current polling on how Canadians feel about it. I guess I'm curious on how you think we can get governments to start to view the industry in a different way and embrace the economic development side and the opportunity and show some pride in Canada being a world leader and creating some of the top IP, the most knowledgeable experts in the space. What do you guys see as some of the opportunities for industry to start governments along and changing their?
Yeah, I definitely feel like there are a few aspects to it. I think about some of the other sectors that the Canadian government has been extremely proud of and really stamping as, Canada being a leader on the global stage, including things like resources, technology, agriculture. And so I think there has to be an education component for everyone across the board to recognize that cannabis is a huge economic driver. And there's a lot of intellectual property that could be shared with the rest of the world that would position us as a leader. Right now, the legal cannabis industry on a global stage is still very early. And so the opportunity is still there for us to show up well in the context of the rest of this world going into their own legalization journey. And so I think that recognition has to first and foremost be understood that it is a fundamental and crucial sector, and to not be shut out of conversations that are imperative to whether it be federal, provincial budgets or other, topics that, are being shown to other industries as well. But then beyond that, really supporting it and raising the flag of saying, yes, from an intellectual property standpoint, from a branding standpoint, from a talent standpoint, how can we ensure that we maintain our leadership?
Yeah, and just jumping off of that, I think, there's really two things. We've got people and products, right? So I feel like we've got a tremendous opportunity that is diminishing by the day. The closer we get to this U.S. federal election, I think we're moving away from that slowly but steadily, is that we've got some tremendously talented people in this country that have taken this from, pretty much ground zero of legalization all the way into a very sophisticated market in a very short period of time. And so if there's other countries looking at legalization at a federal level, you've got this huge talent pool in Canada and in its people to be able to leverage off of. And then the second thing is on products. I mean, we've got federally compliant products that have, crossed international borders. I mean, we're one of the largest exporters of medical cannabis globally at the moment. And there's no reason why we can expand that further with changes to regulation. So I feel like, people and products are two things that I wanted to mention. With respect to Ryan, I think you made a comment on, the government and stigma. I think it's somewhat of a hypocrisy that, you've got the federal government talking about stigma associated with cannabis, yet they're one of the biggest benefactors of taxation related to cannabis, whether it be excise tax, whether it be the cost recovery fee at 2.4%. I mean, 2.4% doesn't sound very much, but you take a company like Canopy and Aurora alone, and their fees going into Health Canada are in the millions of dollars a year. It's probably one of the highest paid fees to Health Canada that anyone's had in the industry. So, it's great to kind of talk about the stigma and to kind of shun the industry, yet benefiting from a lot of what the industry is putting out, I think is somewhat hypocritical to me.
So it's interesting. I'm going to jump in here if I may. One of the things that I think, just to build off that, is COVID's been called the great accelerator. In the fact that societal trends that were 10 to 15 years out are right now. And I think cannabis has seen that, right? Like, for some of us old hats in the sector, it's an interesting in the fact that, could you imagine that in before our 2-year anniversary, we'd be an essential service? It seems bananas. So when you talk about stigma, and when we talk about some of those lessons learned about COVID as an accelerator, I think there's a real interesting opportunity for us to change the conversation, as you were saying, Deepak, about moving past that stigma and really talking about the economic opportunity that the sector has. If you could ask a provincial government and a federal government one thing that you think would unlock the sector, what would those things be?
Nathan, at the federal level, I would have to say, easing off of some of the advertising and marketing restrictions is probably a big one. I think the industry is feeling, very much hamstrung, particularly from competing with the legacy market perspective, on being able to really put the message out there. I mean, we've seen in Alberta some very heavy fines being imposed upon the industry recently for being offside on marketing regulations. And so I think that's going to hamstring the government's own policy objectives at the federal level. On the provinces, oh my God, where do I start? I mean, in BC, eliminating vape tax would be huge, and I feel like that's something that's a no-brainer. I think farm gate in BC again, needs to be front and center of mind. We've seen the provincial government kind of make promises on their way out into an election about kind of throwing something out on farm gate. So I feel like it's very provincially dependent. I think Ontario has a whole bunch of things that need to happen on the retail store side. Alberta needs to make some moves, even though they've been the leader so far. So I really feel like depending on the province, there's going to be different asks, but it really varies province to province.
Mimi, same question to you.
Yeah, for sure. Echoing a lot of those points, but then also to bring to attention on a federal level, to tag on to potentially modifying marketing restrictions would be packaging restrictions. Right now, packaging is a tremendous source of environmental waste. Cannabis aside, I think we're living in a world where we are becoming, as consumers, more conscious about our consumption, more conscious about things like packaging that contribute to the detriment of this planet. And so if we can take a stab at improving what we can in this industry to be more in line with what we see in other industries as well, will be greatly beneficial. Also, the current packaging restrictions impact things like price per milligram for a gummy, for example. And so if you look at more established markets, legal markets, so some of the rec markets in the States, what you can get for a package of gummies, for example, is completely different from what you can get here, where you're having this massive bag that has 2 gummies that, equate to 10 milligrams of THC. That is so far off the market from the legacy market, from what you can find in other rec markets. So that has to change. On the province side, I can go on forever with respect to, what I experienced here in the Ontario market. Top of mind is allowing retailers to be able to operate like any other consumer-facing operation, notably in things like curbside pickup and delivery. We look at bars and restaurants and any other company that is able to interact and provide safe access to product to consumers. Delivery is something that we were able to experience for a few months at the beginning of COVID. COVID has not yet left us, but delivery has, so something needs to change there.
Thanks, Mimi. Just to zoom out a little bit on the international side, I hear every day, differing opinions on Canada's first mover advantage. Some say we've still got lots of runway. Others say that advantage has already disappeared. Others are incredibly bullish on where Canada sort of rests compared to other jurisdictions. Deepak, I'm wondering if you could just take us from your perspective, just a little bit of a tour of where you see things in the sort of the macro sense internationally, both on the medical and the recreational side, considering where sort of other countries are looking at things and sort of what your sense is of this sort of quote unquote first mover advantage and where Canada rests.
Yeah, so Ryan, a whole bunch of things on the medical cannabis side. As I mentioned, we're one of the largest exporters globally of medical cannabis into a variety of countries. You look at a country like Germany, and we still play a very important role with respect to servicing the medical cannabis market in that country, and a lot of the product is coming from Canada. Having said that, there are other countries that are coming quickly online that are low-cost jurisdictions like Colombia and Uruguay, namely as examples where a lot of products, including products that come into Canada, are cultivated. And so, I have to ask the question, does it make sense for us to be cultivating cannabis domestically to be able to service the international market? And, the short answer is we don't really cultivate anything in this country for en masse export generally. Now, there's various UN treaties that are going to continue to require us to cultivate cannabis domestically for recreational purposes. But on the medical side, we're already seeing kind of, the horses left the barn. There's, companies now in Colombia and Macedonia and very, very low cost jurisdictions that have gotten EU GMP. That was kind of like the holy grail and the coveted license that you need to have to export. So, I think the horse has kind of left the barn to a certain extent on that side, and there's a lot of competition coming in. And I'll switch gears a little bit to a place like South Africa or Australia. And what those two jurisdictions have namely done is something that I think Canada has severely lagged on, and that's been the whole regulation of CBD. And I think CBD is just one of those things that, I don't think is a miracle drug, but like it or not, consumers want to get their hands on CBD products. And you look at a market like the UK, CBD is everywhere. It's available from pharmacies to grocery stores to corner stores and everyone else. Australia and South Africa in particular have looked at legislating CBD as an over-the-counter product. And what that basically means is, we recognize that this is a relatively benign substance. We're not going to let it be, everywhere, but we're going to let people that want to get their hands on it without going through, this long process. And putting it in the hands of people, we're going to make sure it's safe and stable from a molecule perspective. Where that leads Canada to is not only are we lacking on the CBD opportunity because we treat CBD like THC, which is completely bizarre when you look at it from a product safety perspective. We won't allow it to get into any natural health products. We'll put it on something called the prescription drug list, which is probably the highest level of regulations you can have in Canada for any products just under narcotic products. But also on the export side, the way that the CBD has been regulated in this country is going to limit us from sending products into places like South Africa and Australia. And the biggest benefactor of kind of importing CBD is actually going to be the United States. So it's going to be US MSOs because of the Farm Bill that are going to be allowed to export CBD products to Australia because it's an over-the-counter product. It doesn't really fall under UN treaties. And it's an opportunity that Canada is going to miss out on unless we make some changes to the CBD regulations.
Thanks, Deepak. A different bent on a similar question to you, Mimi. Other countries have been sort of debating the merits of recreational legalization, and inevitably others will follow suit at some point. As a recreational retailer, somebody who might be considering that as a business opportunity in one of those jurisdictions, given the journey that you've been through with Superette, what advice would you give to somebody in one of those jurisdictions that's looking at maybe getting into the recreational game if and when it's legal in their country?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Ryan. I would say be focused on what you want to bring to the consumer. be focused on what your value proposition is. This industry doesn't need more homogenous players that are doing essentially the same thing and providing that same experience. Recognize, what you can really bring to the table and how you can be differentiated. Treat it like any other retailer or other consumer product good. Treat it like, what does your brand stand for? What are your values? How are you connecting with the consumer on the other end of that? That is going to be really key. And I think the beauty of something like that is there are no boundaries and no borders to that. And so when we talk about Canada in the context of a global opportunity, what we're building at Superette and the brand identity and that retail experience, that is transferable across borders. So not dissimilar to that, anyone who's coming out with a brand, coming out with an experience, I think Canada is a great playground for us to explore within a very regulated and federally legal environment to see how we can expand on that and bring outside those borders.
It's interesting. The conversation about, let's ask a different question, because I think it's interesting where we're talking about where we're losing opportunity. Where are we not talking about where the opportunity is? So, Canada brought regulated retail to the G20 and the Commonwealth nations first. Where do you see our conversations need to evolve to about where we can reclaim our first mover advantage?
Maybe I can jump into that. So from an international perspective, I would say one of the biggest areas that we can really harness that opportunity, particularly from a government perspective, is on the UN treaties, right? I mean, we've been the first country to fully understand what this impact is. How are we going to comply? And, I think the term that the federal government uses is something I hope my kid never finds out about, which is principal non-compliance, right? So it's that factor that we're going to comply with the regulations, but we're also going to protest kind of, within our own ways to be able to get around those. So, I think the UN, particularly the WHO, is very open to having conversations around CBD. There's a vote coming up, in the next month. And I feel like Canada needs to be leading that and saying, the sky hasn't fallen. Here we are 2.5 years into legalization, and, nothing's gone crazy. There's really no concern from our perspective on a national, international stage. So I feel like that's a real opportunity for us to be really speaking out and kind of showing the world how to go around this. I know there's a lot of conversations that are happening. I've been privy to a number of conversations with a number of international governments, including the United States Food and Drug Administration, that basically is looking to Canada to tell them how to go about legislating this product. And so I feel like we need to be more assertive on that side and kind of play that role on the international stage.
Yeah, and just to dovetail off that, I think outside of regulation, I think it's teaching society that cannabis doesn't need to be seen as its own little bubble. It's not like this is the world and cannabis is outside of it. It's how do we live with cannabis with every aspect of our lives, should you choose so. So it's not the scary substance that everyone needs to be afraid of, but rather, making sure that there is enough education and awareness such that people feel safe in experimenting and learning how cannabis can work for them should they choose to.
I think the one other thing I might add is just a very important conversation, Nathan, and I think you touched on this in your intro, and I think the puns in cannabis are almost ironic, but you mentioned two of the most colorful people in the industry, and I think there is a point to be said with respect to people of color and minorities within the industry. The whole kind of conversation, I think we need to elevate that on the international stage. I feel like there's a lot of very talented people in Canada in cannabis that don't often get showcased on the international stage. You typically have a lot of white male CEOs that are representative of the Canadian cannabis industry, and I don't think that's the case. I think there's many people and women of color and people of color that I think could also be showcased on the international stage. So I think it's incumbent on us to do much more of that.
I think that's a great point, Deepak, and I think Canada's cannabis experience so far has a really interesting story to tell. We don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I was wondering if you just each of you tell us a little bit about where your company's at. Deepak, what you guys are up to at Materia, what you have, what you're eyeing up for the rest of this year, maybe into 2021, and then we'll also go to you, Mimi, to hear a little bit about where Superette is and where you guys are going. So Deepak, what do you see as ahead for your company here in the next 6-12 months?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Ryan. So I mean, from our perspective, we're just completing a GMP inspection in our facility in Malta. We'll become one of a handful of companies globally that currently has EU GMP. So we're very much looking forward to that. Our sales on our products, globally have really taken off in COVID, particularly on the CBD side in the UK. We're looking to expand that out, and then even in Germany, we currently continue to sell medical cannabis products into the German market, and so we are looking to kind of leverage and expand that. But we're very optimistic and very excited about the opportunity to be able to bring this Canadian expertise and really leverage it onto the international stage. There's a lot of learnings that have gone into businesses in Canada, and we're just leveraging those on the international stage. So at Materia, we're quite optimistic about the future of medical cannabis on the global stage.
Mimi, what about you? Where's Superette? Where are you guys going? Where can those who might not know listening find your stores?
Yeah, I mean, Superette has a lot going on these days. So for those who aren't familiar with what we have going on so far, we have 2 operating stores in Ontario, 1 in Ottawa and 1 in Toronto. And so by the end of November, we will have our 3rd location open, also in Toronto at Front and Spadina. And so that's what we're busy with these days. But looking ahead to next year, we also have another handful of stores coming online, really building out our retail presence in a meaningful way, and learning new ways to connect with our communities and customers, learning how we can give back to our neighbors and our community everywhere we operate, and also expanding our brand experience to move beyond retail as well. And so we announced the launch of our cannabis product. It will be in market in Alberta very soon. We are one of the first, if not the first, retail-focused brand to launch cannabis products. So this is something that we've been working a long time on and really excited for. And so we can't wait to build a portfolio of cannabis products so that you can consume and experience Superette in your comforts of your home.
Thanks, Nathan. Any sort of parting thoughts before we wrap up?
Can I ask 2 quick questions? The thing that keeps you up at night and the thing that you can't wait to experience in a non-COVID world? Look at Mimi's face.
The second one I feel is easy, in-person interaction. I can't wait for that to be.
A hug. Yeah. How crazy would that be?
Exactly.
Yep. To be able to sneeze outside without people glaring at me and having to defend my colds and allergies.
That's awesome.
Thank you both for taking the time to join us. I think everybody knows Deepak. If they want to know anything that's happening with the industry, to find you on Twitter, and I expect anybody who listens to this will have already done so, because you are the single greatest source for cannabis information that I've found online. Mimi, obviously Superette has one of the most distinctive and exciting retail brands in the entire country, and you're representing that so well in our work at the Canadian Chamber and elsewhere in what you're doing. So thank you guys both for taking some time out of your day to chat with us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.